From Missouri, Mrs. Wagner, for 30 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous materials on the subject of my special order.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in honor of Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month. Today, we remember the millions of victims of genocide throughout history, and we recommit to working toward the day when genocide and mass atrocity crimes are not only inconceivable, Mr. Speaker, they are non-existent. April marks the commemorations of some of the worst genocides in history, including the Holocaust and Rwandan, Cambodian, and Armenian genocides. Time and again, senseless bloodshed has ended innocent lives and fractured families and livelihoods. My hometown of St. Louis is home to the largest Bosnian community outside of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This community has shaped what the city looks and feels like. It has added great cultural diversity to the city, immense intellectual capital, thriving small businesses, and a strong religious presence. 2 decades ago, members of our Bosnian community were refugees. In 1995, Orthodox Serbs under the command of General Ratko Mladic initiated a horrific ethnic cleansing campaign against majority Muslim Bosniaks. The escalating bloodshed forced 130,000 Bosnian refugees to seek new lives in the United States. Thousands were murdered in Srebrenica. Today, I wish to honor these brave men and women. The resilience of our Bosnian neighbors has enriched our city, and their courage inspires me. And it has inspired me to seek change. Tomorrow, I am offering an amendment to the State Department Authorization Act of 2018, asking the administration to study countries at risk of genocide and mass atrocity crimes and craft training regimens for U.S. Foreign Service officers. Should this bill become law, America's diplomats will have the know-how to respond to those conflicts on the ground and act before violence spirals out of control. Most importantly, this amendment establishes that the official policy of the United States of America is to regard the prevention of genocide and atrocity crimes as a core national security interest. However, this is just one step in the right direction. The U.S. government must improve how it responds to conflicts. Last April, I introduced the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act to improve U.S. efforts to prevent mass atrocity crimes. Named after the courageous Auschwitz survivor, and the legislation honors the legacy of Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel and his life work to fight evil around the world. Mr. Wiesel was just 15 years old when the Nazis deported him and his family to Auschwitz. He was the only member of his family to survive. Having witnessed the near total destruction of his people, he spent his life defending the persecuted. In his honor, we fight to rectify injustice and protect the most vulnerable in our society and across the globe. As Mr. Wiesel understood so well, the true horror of genocide is that it is preventable, and the U.S. government has the tools to effect real change. The Elie Wiesel Act would affirm the mission of the United States Atrocities Prevention Board and its work to coordinate prevention and response efforts. It would also authorize the Complex Crisis Fund to support agile, efficient responses to unforeseen crises overseas. This time, when America says never again, our actions will reinforce our platitudes and our words. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you to all of my colleagues who share in this fight. And I wish now to yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague, the gentlelady from Missouri, for her leadership, and I'm honored to join her and other distinguished colleagues this evening in recognition of Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month. Preventing genocide and mass atrocities is a moral imperative that deserves to be at the very top of our priority list. Mass atrocities are large-scale, deliberate attacks against civilian populations. They include genocide, but also crimes against humanity, war crimes, and ethnic cleansing. After the Holocaust, the systematic, bureaucratic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews and members of other persecuted groups by the Nazi regime and its collaborators between 1941 and 1945, people all around the world vowed to never again stand by in the face of genocide. But since then, mass atrocities, including genocide, have been committed in Indonesia, Cambodia, Guatemala, East Timor, the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Sudan, and South Sudan, among other places. Hundreds of thousands of people have been murdered, tortured, disappeared, or suffered sexual violence, and millions more have been forced to flee with profound humanitarian, political, and national security consequences. I don't believe the world's failure to prevent atrocities is because no one cares. In this era of instant communication, powered by social media, most people I meet have seen and passionately condemn the ongoing atrocities in Syria and elsewhere. Nor is it because no one knows what is happening. Many, many people warned us for years about the potential for genocide against the Rohingya in Burma. The problem is that we have not been very good at turning knowledge and moral indignation into action to prevent a bad situation from worsening. We must do better. We must do more. This year, in the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, which I co-chair along with my colleague, Congressman Randy Hultgren, we are looking at the tools we have as U.S. policymakers to prevent mass atrocities and asking how we can strengthen them. We are asking what it would mean to institutionalize an atrocity prevention's lens, so we don't wait until it's so late and the problem is so big that all we can do is lament the immorality and the inhumanity and then provide humanitarian aid to the victims and survivors. As we undertake this effort, we know that there is a lot of good work already underway in both chambers of Congress and on both sides of the aisle to find new ways forward. One example is H.R. 3030, the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act of 2017, led by Representative Wagner and co-sponsored by both myself and Representative Hultgren. We also recognize that government officials cannot do this work alone. We need civil society in all its diversity to help us. We need community associations, churches, synagogues, mosques, schools, and businesses to take a stand against hate speech, to teach and live tolerance, to document and denounce human rights violations, to open their hearts to reconciliation based on justice. We need to get to the point where our societies recognize and honor every person's innate human dignity. And I want to take this opportunity to salute one of the many organizations that are doing just this kind of work. STAND is a student-led movement to end mass atrocities and genocide by organizing and educating their peers and communities. I first met student leaders of STAND in 2005 and 2006 when they were part of the national movement that brought the genocide happening in Darfur, Sudan, to public awareness. They were my teachers during that time. Tonight, representatives of STAND are here listening to this debate. They push us to do better, and I thank them for their commitment and their vision. Mr. Speaker, mass atrocities are human rights violations on a grand scale. We must find new strategies to prevent them from happening and more effective strategies to interrupt and stop them at the very earliest stages, should they begin to unfold. Mr. Speaker, all of us in this chamber, all of us in this country need to do more, because I believe if the United States of America stands for anything, we stand for human rights. We need to be better. We need to be more effective in preventing these mass atrocities and these genocides. So I'm very proud to stand with my colleagues in these efforts. I want to thank the gentlelady from Missouri for her incredible leadership, and I'm honored to participate in this special order with her, and I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for his outstanding words and his support and that of Representative Randy Holkgren on sponsoring and co-sponsoring with me my piece of legislation, the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act. This truly is an issue that isn't just about human rights and giving voice to the voiceless and speaking for the most vulnerable in our society. It is about human dignity across our globe. It's about the U.S. responding to these conflicts in the way that only we can and should do, and provide the kind of moral authority and support to do so through both our Congress and through our Foreign Service officers and others that are working across the globe. So I thank the gentleman for his kind words. And now it's my pleasure to recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Claudia Tenney, for as much time as she may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Congresswoman Ann Wagner. You are just a wonderful inspiration for me as a new member. I also want to thank Congressman McGovern for his comments. This is really important that you're hosting tonight's special order on genocide awareness and prevention. During the month of April, we joined together to honor victims and survivors, to educate the public about genocide, hard to believe it's happening in our time, and to advocate for the prevention of future atrocities. In the past 150 years, tens of millions of men, women, and children have lost their lives during brutal genocides and mass atrocities. Millions have been tortured, raped, and forced from their homes. Some of the darkest moments in the world history have occurred, oddly enough, in the month of April. In April 1933, the Nazi Party began its boycott of Jewish-owned businesses. This marked the beginning of a campaign of hatred that led to the murder of 6 million Jews. My district is home to thousands of refugees from the former Yugoslavia. I have a long history with Yugoslavia. I began my study of the country of Yugoslavia in 1981 when I first participated as a student, a college student from Colgate University, in a semester abroad, and we traveled throughout the entire Yugoslavia in all the different principalities and republics. It was a spectacular and beautiful country, and it sparked a lifelong interest for me in this region. And I was fell in love with the country. I'm fascinated by the people that were there who've survived conquest, from whether it was the Ottoman Empire to being part of so many other parts of human history. We're also victims during the Nazi invasion as well during World War II. I had the lucky opportunity to graduate from college and work as a foreign correspondent in the Press and Cultural Office of the former Yugoslav Consulate in New York. I also worked at that time alongside with ABC Sports during the Winter Olympics held in Sarajevo in 1984. The war in Yugoslavia was a tragic saga in the history of human experience, and especially for me with my long history and love of the country and the people that inhabited this part of the world. I work with people from the consulate, from all the republics and autonomous provinces from the former Yugoslavia. It just seemed unthinkable to me that this human genocide could occur in the region of the world which had experienced many occupying forces due to its very unique and very important geopolitical strategic location in the world. Yugoslavia was always known as the gateway between East and West, the place where you could get from Europe through Yugoslavia to eventually the Middle East along the Mediterranean. This region had diverse culture, religion, and people from all parts of Europe and the Middle East and the world, all united together for centuries, actually, living alongside each other with different values. Certainly they had their differences, but sadly, unfortunately, after all this history of unrest, the war in Yugoslavia eventually elicited the worst in humankind and was witness to one of the most horrific genocides in our generation against Bosnian citizens. To the Bosnian community, April, again, marks 26 years since the beginning of the siege in Sarajevo, Bosnia. The horrific period of violence lasted for over 3.5 years and was the longest siege in modern warfare. All told, over 10,000 people, including 1,500 children, were killed in Sarajevo during this siege. In 1995, the worst massacre within Europe since World War II took place. The Srebrenica massacre killed more than 8,000 Bosnian boys and men during the Bosnian War. In addition to these horrific killings, more than 20,000 civilians were expelled from the area. Many of these Bosnian refugees emigrated to my region. We're thrilled to have them. And it's just worth noting that my son was actually a student in the after-school program at the Jewish Community Center in my area. And the Jewish Community Center was actually instrumental in helping to find safe refuge in our community for these Bosnian Muslims who were suffering this unconscionable genocide and atrocities against them. I think it was the solidarity and the sympathy and the understanding, the true understanding of genocide that our Jewish citizens recognized in our region. And we are grateful to them, and we're also grateful to the Bosnian community for the decision to have so many wonderful Bosnian families visit our city and now remain as citizens. They've provided the same ingenuity and the entrepreneurship and the vibrancy and the creativity that I remember during my days of studying this very special part of the world. And I'm especially grateful to them for enabling me to sustain the bond that developed between me, my family, who have all traveled to that part of the world, and this amazing group of people for the past 37 years of my life. It's become almost a vocation for me, just my study of Serbo-Croatian and my study of this region. And as we mark these tragedies of the past, we must not overlook what is taking place in the present. I just want to mention a little bit about my city. Utica, New York has been recognized as one of the friendly cities to refugees. The City of Utica School District now has over 42 languages spoken. And so we have a number of people coming from war-torn areas where we have very graciously and also very generously, our communities has accepted them and provided them a home. But I want to just highlight one of the communities that is in our region as well. And those are the people from Myanmar and over 700,000 Rohingya people who have fled the Rakhine state in the face of expulsions and violent persecution at the hands of government forces. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad's military butchers its own citizens and uses chemical weapons without regard for international law. Under this dark cloud of atrocities and massive human rights violations, both present and past, I just want to join with my colleagues today in remembering these and remembering to ensure that these lessons are never forgotten. But more important, if we could only make sure they are never repeated. And I just want to sincerely thank my colleague, Congresswoman Ann Wagner, for her great leadership on this issue, her tenacity and her courage and her continued fight to try to help these people who are the most needy, who have just been victimized in our society and across our country and our world. And I just want to thank you for including me tonight. Very special for me to especially recognize the Bosnians as just such a long part of my history, and my heart and my sympathy go to these wonderful people who suffered unfairly. So I just want to say thank you again to Ms. Wagner, Representative, for your great leadership on this issue, and I yield back my time.
I thank the gentlelady for her kind words. Claudia Tenney, gentlelady from New York, is also a leader in this cause and this effort that is really about, as I said, human dignity and human rights across this world. We want a day when no longer are these refugees suffering, whether it's in Syria on the day that President Macron addressed a joint session here in this very chamber, the President of the People's Republic of France, who stood with the United States along with the United Kingdom in the bombings against Syria that were targeted against those who had been barrel bombed and victimized and murdered by the Assad regime in Syria. And we share a common bond with the Bosnian community. We both have very large Bosnian communities, many of whom started out as refugees some 20 years ago. And now, as I said, the cultural diversity, the business, the religious presence has been just wonderful to see flourish in a district like Missouri's 2nd Congressional District. And so I recognize the common bond that we have there. I thank you for participating in this special order that goes to the heart of genocide and mass atrocities across our globe. And I know that the people of your district in New York are also appreciative of all you do here to represent them and those who are the most vulnerable in our society. So I thank the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Claudia Tenney.
Thank you. Hvala lijepo.
And now it's my pleasure to yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Steve Chabot, for as much time as he may consume.
I thank the gentlelady from Missouri for yielding. It is Genocide Awareness Prevention Month, and the gentlelady from Missouri, Ann Wagner, has been a leader in speaking out on this critical issue for many years now, and we appreciate her leadership on that. As a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I've had the opportunity to advocate for global human rights issues for many years. Tonight, I want to condemn a genocide that's been happening before our eyes, the genocide against the Rohingya in Rakhine State, Burma. Last September, the Burmese military began a so-called clearing operation, allegedly in response to some insurgent attacks. In reality, this was just an excuse for a massive and barbaric campaign to forcibly remove the Rohingya from Burma altogether and erase their memory from Rakhine State once and for all, resulting in over 700,000 Rohingya, many of whom are children, fleeing Burma for Bangladesh. This has needlessly left Bangladesh and the world with one of the worst humanitarian crises that the world faces today. While these numbers are truly shocking, as we learn more about the crimes committed by the Burmese military, there can be no doubt that this is, in fact, genocide. When the Rohingya arrived in Bangladesh, they told story after story of the crimes that they had witnessed and that they had personally suffered. Widespread killings, mass graves, rapes, and other unspeakable horrors and injuries. These atrocities have been confirmed by many people who had no axe to grind here or anything. So this is something that the world must see and must believe. In addition, hundreds of villages have been burned and others have been simply bulldozed in a clear attempt to prevent the Rohingya from ever returning. Together, these heinous acts are a deliberate attempt to irreparably harm the Rohingya. This is absolutely genocide. Together with Mr. Engel and Mr. Crawley, our colleagues here in the House, I've helped to lead the House's efforts to address this crisis. With our passage of H-Con Res 90, the House unequivocally condemned the Burmese military's atrocious actions, but more serious action is still needed. Burma's constitution allows the Burmese military to control much of the government, and civilian leadership has taken virtually no real steps to address this violence. That's why I joined again with Mr. Engel and Mr. Crawley to introduce the Burma Act, which applies tough, targeted sanctions on the individuals involved and in leading this genocide. I urge my colleagues to co-sponsor this legislation and then ultimately, of course, to vote for it when the time comes. As we remember the victims of all genocides this month, we must work to adequately address one which is unfolding right before our eyes, right before the world's eyes right now. So again, I want to thank the gentlelady from Missouri for calling this particular action into the attention of our colleagues and the attention of the world, but also other genocides and other atrocities that have occurred across the globe. She is truly a leader, and we're lucky to have her doing that in Congress on an everyday basis, but also in particular this evening. So thank you very much, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Steve Chabot, for his kind words. He is a leader and a senior member of our House Foreign Affairs Committee that I also have the privilege of serving on, and it's an honor, Congressman Chabot, to have you here, this special order during Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month, to give voice to those millions of victims and to say we live for a time when this is non-existent in society. I look forward, Mr. Speaker, tomorrow to offering my amendment to the State Department's Authorization Act of 2018, asking the administration to study countries at risk of genocide and mass atrocity crimes and crafting the kind of training regimens for U.S. Foreign Service officers that are so very important. I look forward to the time when my piece of legislation, the Elie Wiesel Genocide Atrocities Prevention Act, will, Mr. Speaker, be signed into law. It will improve the U.S. efforts to prevent mass atrocity crimes. And I think we all in this chamber, on a bipartisan level, Mr. Speaker, continue to hope and, more importantly, to work towards a time when America says, never again, and our actions reinforce our words. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleagues for coming out. I'd like to thank those advocates, the Friends Committee on National Legislation, STAND, Together We Remember, the Carl Wilkins Fellowship, and so many others that stand with the victims of genocide and mass atrocities. It's an honor to be with my colleagues here tonight and with the advocacy groups that stand for the millions that say never again. And I yield back, Mr. Speaker, the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. Does the gentlelady have a motion?
Mr. Speaker, I offer a motion to adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
The House today debated and voted on two bills, one on the Columbia River